Hi guys, welcome to chapter 8. You guys have just finished up your midterm exam over chapters 1 through 7. So chapter 8 is starting the second half of this semester and the first chapter that will be on your final exam. Water in the body. Water makes up 60% of your body weight. 2/3 of that is intracellular and 1/3 is extracellular. So when we're talking about intracellular water, we're talking about the water that is inside of your cells, whether that's in your muscle cells or epithelial cells or any type of cell. 2/3 of the water in your body is inside the cell and 1/3 is on the outside. So that would be like in your blood or other fluids that surround cells in your body. Cell membranes are permeable to water, and this just means that water is able to cross the cell membrane by osmosis to dilute dissolved solutes, and we'll talk about osmosis more in later slides, and also about minerals like sodium and potassium and how they work to cross the membrane as well. Because water is a huge component in your blood, it does affect blood pressure. Blood pressure is the amount of force exerted by the blood against the walls of the arteries. And then this picture is from your book, showing you how water movement in your blood vessels affects your blood pressure. So we have blood flow. The blood flow in this picture is from left to right. And so over here on the left-hand side, what we're seeing is high pressure from the inside of the blood vessel onto your blood vessel walls. And this high blood pressure can be due to if you, had a lot of water to drink. All of a sudden, that increased water will increase your blood volume, and that increased blood volume will increase the pressure on the inside of the walls of your blood vessel. But because of osmosis, that water is then able to move through the walls of the blood vessel, move through, these cells that are, these tissue cells that are outside, and equalize that pressure to lower the blood pressure by either changing the concentration of water or the concentration of solutes in your blood to kind of equalize that out. Water balance. Water is not stored in your body, so water in must equal water out. When we say water in, we're talking about your consumption of water, fluids, foods, and production during cellular respiration. And then water out, excretion in urine and feces, evaporation from the skin and lungs, and also sweating. And this is excuse me, also from your book, showing sort of the scale balancing water in versus water out. The water intake and water output here is both 12.5 cups, but you'll see that there are different amounts associated with different things. But in the end, they both equal the same amount. Stimulating water intake. So this is the mechanisms that take place in your body to let you know that you are beginning to get dehydrated and you need to find something to drink. First, thirst signals arise when the thirst center in the brain senses the decrease in blood volume and an increase in the concentration of dissolved substances in the blood. So, decreased blood volume, increased solute concentration. Your mouth will become dry because less water is available to make saliva. And together, that dry mouth and signals from the brain cause thirst and motivate fluid intake. As water is consumed, Blood volume increases and solute concentration decreases, restoring water balance. So you'll see what was initially triggered by a decrease in blood volume and an increase in solute concentration. Once you drink water, that's remedied by an increase in blood volume and a decrease in solute concentration. Regulating water loss. So we're going to talk about your kidneys. Your kidneys function as a filter, and water moves from the blood into the kidney tubules. Blood cells and proteins are too large and remain in the blood. Needed substances are reabsorbed back into the blood, and unneeded substances are excreted in the urine. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. If more water is lost than taken in, then the concentration of solutes in the blood increases. This stimulates thirst and secretion of antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, from the brain. ADH will then stimulate the kidneys to reabsorb water to keep the blood from becoming more concentrated. So ADH is a really important communicator in your body. So it can relay messages to your kidneys to say, okay, we're low on water. You can kind of slow down your filtering and slow down the amount of water that's released to keep your body from becoming further dehydrated. Regulating urinary water losses. So this is that sort of dehydration mechanism that goes on in your brain, but instead of talking about it stimulating thirst, this is just another diagram showing how those messages get relayed to your kidneys to reduce water loss. So when an individual hasn't consumed enough water, blood volume decreases and solute concentration in the blood increases. In response to the decrease in blood volume and increase in solute concentration, the pituitary gland secretes ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. That antidiuretic hormone then signals to your kidneys to increase the amount of water reabsorbed into the blood, which results in less water lost in the urine and conservation of body water. The functions of water. So why is water so important? Well, it's a medium for and participant in metabolic reactions. It helps regulate acid-base balance, transports nutrients and wastes, provides protection, and helps to regulate our body temperature. Water helps to cool the body. So when you are exercising or working really hard and your body temperature is increasing, your blood will carry that heat from the core of your body to the capillaries, the very tiny blood vessels near the surface of your skin. Heat is then released from the skin to the environment, and the water in sweat evaporates from the skin, causing that heat to be lost. The evaporation of the sweat cools the skin and the blood at the skin's surface. So once cooled from the evaporation of sweat, the blood in your capillaries can then return to the core of your body at a lower temperature. So this is great, right? That we're able to do this and that water is able to help us sweat and cool down. But that evaporation, though it helps cool our body, does result in water loss. So if you're, working out at the gym or working really hard at work or in your yard or doing anything where you're sweating quite a bit, it's important to replenish the water that's being lost through evaporation so that you don't suffer from dehydration. Water in health and disease. Without food, you could probably survive for 8 weeks. However, without water, you could only survive a few days. Too much water can also be a problem if it changes the osmotic balance in your body. So first, dehydration. Dehydration is a state that occurs when not enough water is present to meet the body's needs. It causes a reduction in blood volume, impairs ability to deliver oxygen and nutrients to cells, and removes waste products. Symptoms of dehydration include thirst, headache, fatigue, loss of appetite, dry eyes, dry mouth, and dark-colored urine. So just like dehydration is a problem, you can also suffer serious health consequences if you experience water intoxication. So water intoxication is quite simply when you have had way too much water. It's when your water intake is greater than water lost, and the sodium in your blood becomes so diluted that it causes hyponatremia. So breaking down that word a little bit, hypo means low, that Na is the chemical symbol for sodium, and emia means in the blood, so low sodium in the blood. Water moves by osmosis from the blood into the tissues to try to dilute the higher concentration of solutes, causing tissue swelling or edema. This swelling can become a problem, especially in areas like the brain, um, where excessive swelling can really create a lot of pressure and do a lot of damage. Now, we don't hear too much about water intoxication. Certainly, dehydration is much more prevalent. Um, there was a story in the news several years ago. I can't remember where it was, but it wasn't in Maine or anywhere around here. Um, but in the example, um, somebody actually died from water intoxication. What happened was there was a fraternity that was doing hazing for new, I guess, new recruits for their fraternity organization, and they were having a party, and part of the hazing was that new recruits for the fraternity had to drink um, like gallon jugs of water, and they weren't allowed to pee it out or throw up. So, a group of people were there, kind of egging them on, and really like telling them to keep drinking, keep drinking, keep drinking. And what ended up happening, somebody died from water intoxication because they were just taking in way too much water way too quickly and weren't able to excrete it. So water intoxication is a thing. It does happen. We just don't necessarily hear as much about it as we do dehydration. Meeting water needs. The AI for water needs in men is 3.7 liters per day, and in women, 2.7 liters per day. That need is increased if you are doing increased physical activity, if there's an increase in temperature, a decrease in humidity, a low calorie diet, a high salt diet, high fiber diet, or alcohol intake. All of those can kind of increase dehydration or increase, the risk of dehydration. So increased water consumption is needed. All right, so we're going to now move from water on to our conversation of minerals. So there are 20 minerals that are needed by the body in small amounts. They work to maintain structure and regulate chemical reactions and body processes. We're going to talk about two major classes of minerals. The first, major minerals, are those which are needed in amounts over 100 milligrams per day. And these include sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and sulfur. And then trace minerals are those that are needed in amounts less than 100 milligrams per day. And these include iron, copper, zinc, selenium, iodine, chromium, fluoride, manganese, molybdenum, and some others, but those are the ones that we'll talk about. So just like our conversation of vitamins, we have this little chart here showing the classification of minerals, those that are considered major, those that are considered trace, and then in the major minerals, a little breakdown of those that are considered electrolytes and those that are considered essential for bone health. So this is a really helpful chart when thinking of just kind of a general breakdown of minerals. It's a good thing to copy down and kind of get in your head as an easy easy tool to kind of remember where each of these fall. Minerals in our food. So we get minerals from both plant and animal sources. The amount of minerals in our food can be affected by a number of things, like the amount of minerals that are in the soil, processing of our food, such as being added during fortification or removed, maybe by peeling or by processing like grains and the removal of the bran and the germ, all kinds of things. Also, absorption and bioavailability. We talked about bioavailability in the last chapter. So the availability of minerals in our food can be inhibited by substances in plants, other minerals, or amounts in the body. And this is in your textbook. It's nothing you have to memorize, but I think it's kind of a helpful little chart. It's just looking at the different sections of MyPlate and which minerals are most prevalent in each of the food groups. Compounds that interfere with mineral absorption. This is interesting. It's certainly not exhaustive. There's lots of things that we could talk about here, but it's really just to give you an example and get you thinking about how minerals interact with other chemicals in our bodies. So the first, oxalates, are found in spinach, rhubarb, beet greens, and chocolate, and they've been found to interfere with the absorption of calcium and iron. So if you had a high concentration of oxalates from these foods, even if you were consuming foods that had calcium and iron in them, the oxalates might actually prevent your body from absorbing that calcium or iron. Then tannins, found in tea and some grains, can interfere with the absorption of iron. And phytates, found in grains, bran, and soy products, bind calcium, zinc, iron, and magnesium, limiting the absorption of these minerals. Phytates can be broken down by yeast, so the bioavailability of minerals is higher in yeast-leavened foods such as breads. So not compounds you're going to have to memorize or remember, be quizzed on, but some good food for thought when you're thinking about how the foods that you eat interact with one another and affect the absorption of certain minerals. Mineral function. So they contribute to body structures, regulate body processes, regulate blood pressure, regulate water balance, regulate energy metabolism, and affect growth and development through their role in the expression of certain genes. And they also act as cofactors needed for enzyme activity. So this is from your text showing the role of cofactors. It's similar to the role of coenzymes that we talked about when we were talking about vitamins. So in this example, this little sort of pointed shape is a mineral cofactor, and you'll see that this blue shape is an incomplete enzyme. Once the mineral cofactor fits into the enzyme, it becomes activated. And once that enzyme becomes activated, it's able to carry out its role in transferring this little purple piece from this red compound to the yellow compound. But you'll see that this site where that actually takes place would only be present on the enzyme if the mineral cofactor was there. So if for some reason there was a mineral deficiency for this particular mineral, then this reaction would be unable to take place. Okay, so just an example, kind of a simplified down example, but showing you what I mean when I say cofactor and how cofactors play an important role in enzymatic reactions. So your electrolytes, first we're going to talk about electrolytes. These are all major minerals on the left-hand side of that graphic that we showed earlier. We're going to talk about sodium, potassium, and chloride. Electrolytes are positively or negatively charged ions that conduct an electrical current in solution. Ions are charged atoms. Negative charge means that that ion gained a negative electron, and a positive charge means that that ion lost a negative electron. Electrolytes are essential for fluid balance maintenance, nerve impulse conduction, and cellular signaling. So the three electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and chloride. Sodium has a positive charge because it has lost a negative electron, and it exists extracellularly outside of your cells. Potassium also has a positive charge, so it has lost a negative electron, but it exists intracellularly or inside your cells. And then chloride has a negative charge because it has gained a negative electron, and like sodium, it exists extracellularly. Electrolyte functions. So in this picture, this is from your book also, the little blue dots are supposed to be showing sodium concentration. So over on the left, we have just kind of a normal, pretty, pretty regular sodium concentration, not too high, not too low. And then this person maybe, eats a meal that's high in sodium, thus increasing the sodium concentration of your body. So you'll notice in the center here, there's lots of blue dots. They're more tightly packed together. And that high blood sodium stimulates thirst, which leads the person to drink water. That water then comes in and works to dilute the sodium in the blood, thus returning the body to a lower sodium concentration state. Electrolyte functions. We mentioned on the slide, we talked about nerve function. So this is also from your book showing how, in this example, this is the nerve cell membrane. We have the sodium ions, these positive ions existing extracellularly, so they're outside the cell membrane. And then we have the potassium positive ions intracellularly. And then in this example, this person is getting pricked with a pin, and how that pin is creating this compression on this nerve cell and causing some of that sodium to be pushed inward towards the nerve cell. And that increase in pressure is what causes the pain receptors to sense, that you're getting poked, that you're getting injured, and encourages a bodily response to that. Electrolytes in health and disease. Hypertension is a condition in people where their blood pressure is consistently at or above 140/90 millimeters of mercury or greater. Hypertension can be caused by increased contractions of the heart, increased blood volume, or decreased radius of blood vessels. When we say decreased radius of blood vessels, we're talking about like if somebody has plaques or fatty deposits along the inside of their blood vessels, those plaques will take up some of that space, making the interior size of the blood vessels smaller and restricting blood flow. Hypertension can result in atherosclerosis, heart attack, and in more severe cases, stroke and death. It can be treated with diet, exercise, and medication, and risks of hypertension include genetics, race, age, obesity, diet, and physical activity. Electrolyte deficiency. Deficiencies in electrolytes can lead to imbalances, and these electrolyte imbalances can cause disturbances in acid-base balance, so changes in body pH. Also, poor appetite, muscle cramps, confusion, apathy, constipation, or irregular heartbeat. Electrolyte toxicity. It's not possible for healthy people to consume too much potassium from foods. However, excess potassium from supplements can cause your heart to stop. excess sodium can also come from increased consumption or dehydration. So just something to note, if you're taking a supplement that maybe contains potassium, to really be aware of the amount that you're getting and if supplementation is really necessary, because too much is not a good thing. Electrolyte recommendations for sodium, the UL is 2,300 milligrams per day. So that's the upper level. And many people, the majority of Americans, myself included, get more than 2,300 milligrams per day of sodium. Above that amount, that's when you increase your risk of high blood pressure, hypertension, and some of those conditions that we talked about. Sodium is very present in foods that we eat every day. We'll talk about that on the next slide. And so it's very easy to go above sodium recommendations. So it's something that you really have to be mindful of and work at to make sure that you consume a healthy level of sodium. Adults with hypertension and pre-hypertension and hypertension, their recommendation for sodium is only 1,500 milligrams per day because they're at a high risk. But the typical consumption, as I said, for Americans is about 3,400 milligrams per day, so way above the upper limit recommendation. In potassium, the DRI, daily recommended intake, is 4,700 milligrams per day. Daily value, 3,500 milligrams per day. However, the typical consumption of potassium is only 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams per day. So typically sodium consumption is way higher than it needs to be, and potassium consumption is way lower than it needs to be. However, with potassium, again, if you remember, it is nearly impossible to have too much potassium from food, but you can have negative health consequences if you supplement too much potassium. So if potassium is something that you're not getting enough of in your diet, it's best to look at dietary intervention and how you can get more from the foods that you eat every day before considering supplementation, because it can be dangerous. Sodium in processed foods. So this is where does that sodium come from? If we're all eating too much salt, where is it coming from? So this is showing us the blue wedge is home cooking. Home cooking is the lowest amount, so only 5% of the sodium that we consume comes from cooking at home. 6% comes from a salt shaker at the table, so seasoning, foods before we eat them. 12% is naturally present in foods. Sodium is a mineral. It's going to be there in foods that we eat that are not processed. But then the green, 77%, more than 3/4 of the salt that we consume is added to processed food. So if you're looking to limit the sodium in your diet, the easiest way to do that would be to limit your consumption of processed foods. And this is another chart. So on the top, it's showing more, or on the top it's showing less processed foods, and on the bottom it's showing more processed foods. So these are kind of sort of comparable, more or less. So the less processed foods, you'll see the orange bar is potassium, the green bar is sodium. We have higher orange bar potassium for all of these and much lower sodium. Then when we look down here at the more processed foods, much higher sodium than potassium in all of these. So if you were, for instance, if you wanted to have chicken, 3 ounces of chicken nuggets has way more sodium than potassium. So if you were somebody that was looking to limit your sodium, you might instead choose a less processed chicken breast, same size, 3 ounces, and you'd be getting potassium, but not as much sodium. So, canned green beans versus fresh green beans, French fries versus a baked potato. So all kinds of different exchanges here and how those choices can impact your mineral consumption. Little note on nutrition labels. Currently, potassium and sodium are located right here at the center of the label. There is a new food label that's being introduced. You might see it in some foods. Sodium is going to be pretty much where it always has been, but potassium is going to be listed down at the bottom with the other vitamins and minerals. So just be looking for that change if it's something that you're checking out. This is from your text table 8.1, just a little table summary of what we've talked about so far with regard to water and electrolytes. I think these tables are really helpful in terms of comparing different minerals to one another, their deficiencies, their toxicities, their sources. So just something to check out if you're looking for a way to sort of organize your information. Major minerals and bone health. So if you're looking at that chart, that red with all the red boxes from earlier, this is going to be the second column from the left. We're still talking about major minerals, but instead of electrolytes, we're talking about those specifically associated with bone health. So your bones are the hardest, strongest structures in the body. They're made up of a protein matrix, which is mostly collagen and requires vitamin C. You'll remember from our discussion of vitamin C that it can help with the absorption of iron. It can also help with the creation of bone. So it's really important. Your bones are hardened by minerals like calcium and phosphorus. Vitamin D is needed to maintain calcium and phosphorus levels. So again, we have another sort of crossover with vitamins and minerals working together. Also, magnesium, sodium, and fluoride all can play a role in hardening and strengthening your bones. Your bones are living tissue. They work to support the weight of your body and participate in movement. They're constantly being broken down and reformed during bone remodeling. Peak bone mass is maximum bone density attained in life, usually in young adulthood. So for many of you, you are likely reaching a point of peak bone mass. So it's a point where it's really important to focus on bone health, focus on your calcium, your vitamin D intake to make sure that you're able to achieve peak bone mass so that you have that strength and that structure to last you later in life. Osteoporosis, probably something that you've heard of. It's characterized by more bone loss than formation, which can result in fractures. Bone mass and osteoporosis. So this picture here on the right, we have normal bone here on the right. You'll see this is kind of cut in half. So this is the exterior edge of your bone, and this is what the inside looks like. And this matrix, this kind of web of fibers, is what gives your bone its strength. So then on the left, we have bone weakened by osteoporosis, and you'll notice that that matrix is kind of all worn out. There's big holes in some places, and that is what would lead to increased risk of broken bones and weakness. So this graph is showing us bone mass and age in years. During puberty, bone mass increases rapidly. That's what we see this here. And then these peaks are when we are achieving peak bone mass. So the blue line is for males and the pink line is for females. And you'll see it's right about late 20s, early 30s is about peak bone mass. And then after you achieve that peak bone mass for both men and women, you slowly start to lose bone mass after about age 35. So it's really important that about age 30, you're able to achieve the best bone mass that you can. If you don't, then you might be starting out with much lower bone mass, which would lead to an even higher rate of bone loss, leaving you at a greater risk for fractures and other complications later in life. Bone mass and osteoporosis. So in somebody that's experiencing osteoporosis, that affects all the bones in your body, one of which are the bones in your spinal cord. So in this example, there's somebody whose spine has been weakened by osteoporosis, causing the front edge of their vertebrae to collapse, so the spine bends forward. This can, of course, also happen over time if somebody has spent a lot of time sort of bent over and in that sort of hunched position. I think a more modern day example would have this person holding a cell phone or maybe sitting at their computer. So it also speaks to, the importance of good posture as well as bone health. Osteoporosis occurs when more bone is lost than formed, can result in fractures, and risks to osteoporosis include a level of peak bone mass and rate at which bone is lost. This is also affected by genetics, gender, age, hormones, low body weight, and lifestyle. Lifestyle risks including smoking, alcohol, not enough exercise, and poor diet. Women have more age-related bone loss than men, especially when estrogen levels decrease after menopause. And this is table 8.2 in your text. This is specific to osteoporosis and how each of the risk factors can affect the rate of osteoporosis. Soda versus milk. So this is just a little comparison, kind of showing you the healthy beverages versus not so healthy beverages. So this is comparing low-fat milk to a cola soft drink. In both examples, they are 12-ounce portions. The calories in 12 ounces of low-fat milk is 153 calories, and in a 12-ounce soda, it's 150 calories. So pretty near equal, right? Just about the same. And you'll notice when it comes to minerals that are in the soft drink, there's really none. There's some phosphorus, but none of any others. And in the low-fat milk, there's tons of different minerals that are all beneficial to your body. So both 12 ounces, both 150 calories, but when it comes to getting more bang for your buck, you're going to see that in the low-fat milk versus a cola soft drink. So calcium, 99% of the calcium in our body is in our bones and teeth. A very small amount, about 1%, is found in body cells and fluids where it works with muscle contraction, neurotransmitter release, blood pressure regulation, cell communication, and blood clotting. The levels of calcium in your body are regulated by hormones. So if the calcium in your body is too high, the hormone calcitonin works to tone it down. So the calcitonin will tell your body, okay, hey, we have too much calcium, so it'll work to bring that level back to normal. And if the calcium level in your body is too low, there's PTH and calcitriol, which will try to bring it back up. So they'll signal to your body, hey, our calcium is too low. Tell the kidneys, okay, don't excrete as much calcium. We need to conserve it and try to bring that back up to a normal level. And this is just a graphic showing what we just had on the last slide. Excuse me. In the instance of low blood calcium, that PTH, parathyroid hormone, will tell your kidneys, hey, we have low calcium, maybe don't excrete so much. So they'll kind of conserve some calcium to return your blood calcium up to a normal level. What else can happen is the parathyroid hormone will actually tell your bones, hey, we don't have enough blood calcium. And it stimulates calcium release from your bone, which will bring your blood calcium up to a normal level, but that release of calcium from your bones can speed the weakening and breakdown of your bones. So it's something that, by making sure you have a healthy level of blood calcium, that you can really work to avoid, because it could result in really negative effects to your bones over time. The RDA for calcium, for those ages 19 to 50, is 1,000 milligrams per day, and the UL is 2,500 milligrams per day. Sources of calcium include dairy products, dark green vegetables, fish with bones, foods processed and fortified with calcium. Deficiency of calcium can lead to osteoporosis, and calcium excesses can be caused by cancers, increased levels of PTH or parathyroid hormone, excessive calcium and or vitamin D intake, causing altered availability of iron, zinc, magnesium, and phosphorus, constipation, loss of appetite, abnormal heartbeat, weight loss, fatigue, frequent urination, soft tissue, calcification, kidney stones, and further damage to your kidneys. And different sources of calcium, you'll see dairy sources are pretty high. Also sardines, tofu, and some green vegetables where you're going to find the most. Moving on from calcium, we have phosphorus. Most is found in bones and teeth along with calcium. It is also found in soft tissues as it's needed for phospholipids, which, if you remember, we talked about phospholipids back when we were talking about fats and triglycerides. Phospholipids have those water-soluble heads that allow them to make up cell membranes. Also DNA, RNA, and ATP structures. And ATP, if you remember, is the energy of a cell. Phosphorus is also used for enzyme activity regulation and cellular acidity maintenance. And this is right from your text, but it's showing you this picture is a picture of an animal cell, and it's just noting every single place in the cell where phosphorus is essential. So I'm not going to go down through all of it. It's just listing the things that we had on the last slide, but it's just important to note just how many places in the cell phosphorus is important. And when you think about how many cells you have in your body and all of the important functions that they serve, it really helps you to realize just how important phosphorus is for healthy body function. The RDA for adults for phosphorus is about 700 milligrams per day, and the UL is way beyond that, 4,000 milligrams per day. Sources of phosphorus include dairy products, meat, cereal, bran, eggs, nuts, fish, and food additives used in baking goods, cheese, processed meats, and soft drinks. Deficiency of phosphorus is very rare, but it can be seen due to chronic diarrhea or poor absorption due to the overuse of aluminum-containing antacids. And phosphorus deficiency can cause bone loss, weakness, or loss of appetite. Excess phosphorus consumption does not appear to be harmful for healthy adults, but it can be a concern with overconsumption of soft drinks. Next, major mineral related to bone health, magnesium. 50 to 60% of magnesium is found in our bones. The rest is found in cells and fluids and is needed for calcium regulation, blood pressure regulation, and ATP structure stabilization, which is important for your body being able to pull energy from carbohydrates, fat, and protein, nerve and muscle functioning, and DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis. Excuse me. The RDA for magnesium in men is 420 milligrams per day, and in women it's 320 milligrams per day. Sources of magnesium include leafy greens, nuts, seeds, legumes, bananas, germ, and bran of whole grains. Deficiency of magnesium is rare and can lead to osteoporosis, nausea, muscle weakness and cramping, irritability, mental derangement, blood pressure, and heartbeat changes. Excess Magnesium intake, we don't really see magnesium excess from food intake. However, it is seen sometimes with drugs or supplements and can cause nausea, vomiting, low blood pressure, and other cardiovascular changes. So here again, we're looking at magnesium sources, a lot in spinach, a lot in plant proteins like beans, tofu, nuts, seeds, also down in the grains, oatmeal, and whole wheat bread. So magnesium is pretty well spread out in the food groups. There's a lot of different sources. Excuse me. And sulfur. Sulfur is part of amino acids and proteins. Glutathione, which is needed for detoxification. And B vitamins, thiamine, and biotin, which we talked about last chapter. Sulfur is a major component in both of those. Sulfur works to regulate the acidity, so regulate the pH of your body. There is no RDA for sulfur. Sources include part of dietary proteins and sulfur-containing vitamins, and also found in some food preservatives. And there have been no known effects of deficiency. So table 8.3 in your text, again, really helpful summary of the information that we talked about for major minerals that play a role in bone health. So I encourage you to look through that. It's a pretty helpful way of organizing information. All right, so that concludes our discussion of the major minerals, both those needed for needed as electrolytes and those needed for bone health. So now we're going to move into our discussion of trace minerals. The first trace mineral is iron. Iron is part of hemoglobin, which transports oxygen to body cells and carries carbon dioxide away from them for elimination by the lungs. So hemoglobin is a huge part of your blood. It's super, super important. So without iron, that gas exchange that occurs in your blood wouldn't be possible. It's also needed for other iron-containing proteins such as myoglobin. Myoglobin is a muscle protein which increases oxygen available for muscle contraction. Iron is essential for ATP production, and heme iron in proteins is absorbed more than twice as efficiently as the non-heme iron in plant sources. Iron absorption, uses, and loss. So this diagram comes right from your text. I'm not going to go into super detail on this, but you can see how the iron ends up getting transported through your blood, where it can then be used by your body cells, in bone marrow, where it's used to create new red blood cells. And then iron storage can be found in the liver and spleen of your body. The RDA for iron in adults is 8 milligrams per day, and the UL is 45 milligrams per day. Sources include red and organ meats, legumes, leafy greens, and whole and enriched grains. Deficiency for iron is known as iron deficiency anemia. It can cause fatigue, weakness, headache, decreased work capacity, body temperature problems, behavior changes, increased infection, impaired development, and lead poisoning. So obviously you wouldn't just get lead poisoning, you would have to have increased contact with lead, but iron is a mineral that helps to bind to lead in your body so that it can be excreted. So if you're somebody that maybe has workplace exposure to lead, a deficiency in iron could keep that lead from being excreted from your body, thus leading to a buildup and maybe lead poisoning. Excess iron can lead to intestinal damage, damaging the lining of your intestines, abnormal body acidity, so abnormal pH, which could lead to shock and liver failure. Iron overload can sometimes be found with hemochromatosis, which is an inherited condition. Iron sources in foods, we see a lot up in the protein category, lentils, beef, sunflower seeds, but also spinach and whole grain sources. Iron deficiency, so a couple of looks at red blood cells under a microscope. The example on the left is normal red blood cells, and then on the right we see an example of iron deficiency anemia. In a normal iron state, we have iron in your red blood cells. That's where the iron goes first. Then we have iron that makes up the plasma in your blood, and then we have your iron stores. So as somebody experiences iron deficiency, the first place that that's depleted is in your iron stores. Then the iron in your plasma gets depleted, and then last, that iron comes out of your red blood cells. So if somebody is showing depletion in iron in their red blood cells, then they are far into experiencing deficiency, because that would be the last place that the iron would be taken out of. So that can really signal a real problem. Iron deficiency can be a result of a number of things. Demographics, so women of childbearing age, pregnant women, infants, children, and adolescents are more likely to experience iron deficiency. Social and medical factors, poverty, and intestinal parasites can also affect iron deficiency. And then dietary, low total iron consumption, vegetarian diets, and dieting can all decrease iron levels. And, intersections of several of these, somebody could have more than one of these risk factors, which of course would further increase your risk of iron deficiency. Next trace mineral, we're going to talk about copper. Copper containing protein is needed for iron transport from intestinal cells. So another crossover where we see multiple minerals working together. Copper is a component of proteins and enzymes that are involved in connective tissue synthesis, lipid metabolism, heart muscle maintenance, and immune and central nervous system functions. For adults, the RDA for copper is 900 micrograms per day, and the UL is 10 milligrams per day. So 10 milligrams is way, 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 way higher than 900 micrograms. Sources of copper include organ meats, seafood, nuts, seeds, whole grain breads and cereals, and chocolate. Deficiency of copper can lead to iron deficiency anemia, again because copper and iron work together. Deficiency can also lead to decreased collagen, high blood cholesterol, impaired growth, heart and nervous system degeneration, hair color and structure changes, increased infections, and decreased levels of antioxidants. Excess copper intake is seen predominantly with supplement consumption or use of copper containers, which can cause some copper from the container to leach into the food. Also can be seen in contaminated water and can lead to abdominal pain, vomiting, and diarrhea. All right, next trace mineral, we're moving right along here. We're going to talk about zinc. Zinc is involved in the functioning enzymes involved in scavenging free radicals. So if you remember from our discussion of vitamin C and E, preventing oxidative damage from free radicals. Also DNA and RNA synthesis, carbohydrate metabolism, acid-base balance, so pH, absorption of folate from food, storage and release of insulin, mobilization of vitamin A from the liver, stabilization of cell membranes, and it also influences hormonal regulation of cell division. So a lot of really important things, mechanisms that zinc plays a role in. The RDA for zinc in men is 11 milligrams per day, and in women it is 8 milligrams per day. Sources of zinc include meat, liver, eggs, dairy products, vegetables, legumes, and seeds. Deficiencies in zinc can lead to decreased growth, development and immunity, skin rashes, and diarrhea. Zinc excess can be caused by supplements, which can lead to gastrointestinal irritation, vomiting, appetite loss, diarrhea, abdominal cramps, headaches, decreased immunity, decreased levels of HDL, so high density lipoprotein, copper, and iron absorption. And then sources of zinc, you see a lot of them there in the protein sources up top, then also in dairy, and some in the vegetables and whole grains. Next up, for trace minerals, we have selenium. Selenium is incorporated into the structure of certain proteins like glutathione peroxidase, which decreases oxidative damage. So decreasing oxidative damage is, acting on free radicals. And selenium is also present in a protein that's needed to make thyroid hormones. In adults, the RDA for selenium is 55 milligrams per day, and the UL is 400 milligrams per day. Sources of selenium include seafood, kidney, liver, eggs, grains, nuts, and seeds. A deficiency in selenium is known as Keshan disease, which is a type of heart disease that's seen predominantly in China, and can also lead to an increased risk of cancer. So this is from your book, this is showing selenium as it is present in the glutathione peroxidase, and how that works to neutralize both peroxides and also free radicals in order to limit cell damage. And this is showing that Keshan disease and different regions of China that experience selenium deficiency or excess selenium. And in the case of China, what makes it so unique and what you'll see with the different regions that are highlighted is a lot of the selenium is actually present in the soil. And so from the soil, it then is transferred into the food that's grown and eaten. Now, different regions of China have different levels of selenium in the soil. So in the more sort of whitish tan areas, those are areas where the soil is very, very low in selenium. And so in those areas, there's higher levels of that Keshan disease because of the low selenium in the soil, whereas the more darker brown, darker red color are areas where the soil contains really high levels of selenium, which can lead to selenium toxicity in those regional populations. So just another, linking nutrition to epidemiology and kind of thinking about how geographical regions can have an influence on nutrient levels in certain populations. Next up, for trace minerals, we're going to talk about iodine. 3/4 of iodine is found in the thyroid gland, which is located in your throat, kind of in your neck. It's not in your throat, but it's in front of your throat in that area. Iodine is a component of thyroid hormones which regulate metabolic rate, growth, and development and promote protein synthesis. Iodine deficiency, this is again looking at regional deficiencies and excess. The green areas are those areas that are most likely to experience iodine deficiency. And then the light orange and yellow areas are areas that have adverse health consequences as a result of increased iodine consumption. And this individual here on the right has a goiter, which in this case is associated with an iodine deficiency. And the goiter, you'll notice, is located on her neck, because that is where your thyroid gland is, and where that iodine deficiency is going to present itself in terms of a physical symptom there. So the RDA for iodine in adults is 150 milligrams per day. The UL is 1100 milligrams per day. Sources of iodine include seafood, iodized salt, food contaminants, as well as additives. Deficiencies in iodine can result in decreased thyroid hormones, causing decreased metabolic rate, fatigue, weight gain, goiter, which we saw in the last slide, which is an enlarged thyroid. During pregnancy, it can lead to spontaneous abortion, stillbirths, or cretinism, and instances of excess iodine can also present themselves as goiters, which again is that enlarged thyroid. Iodized salt we talked about when we talked about fortification. Salt, if you eat sea salt, it doesn't have iodine in it. Iodized salt was created earlier in the 1900s as a means of combating iodine deficiency that was being seen in the population by adding iodine to salt, something that people frequently eat and cook with. We were able to kind of combat a lot of cases of iodine deficiency. Next, trace mineral, chromium. It's a component of glucose tolerance factor, which is a small peptide required to maintain normal blood glucose levels. The RDA for chromium in ages 19 to 50. For men, 35 micrograms per day, and women, 25 micrograms per day. Sources of chromium include liver, brewer's yeast, nuts, and whole grains. Deficiency in chromium is rare in the U.S., and there is very little evidence of any issues from excess. Next up, fluoride. Fluoride is incorporated into crystals in tooth enamel, which protects against cavity-causing acids produced by bacteria. In saliva, it decreases bacterial acid production, inhibits dissolution of tooth enamel by acid, and increases enamel remineralization after acid exposure. It's also incorporated into crystals in your bone. So really working to strengthen and harden the enamel on your teeth and also in your bones. The RDA for fluoride is 0.05 milligrams per kilogram per day. So that's milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. So fluoride is a little unique in that the RDA is going to be dependent on your body size. The UL for fluoride is 0.1 milligrams per kilogram per day for infants and children less than 9 years old, and 10 milligrams per day between 9 and 70 years. So that's a lot. 10 milligrams per day of fluoride is a lot of fluoride, way more than any of us would ever get from just normal consumption of food and water. Sources, fluoride is in small amounts in almost all soil, water, plants, and animals, also found in toothpaste, tea, marine fish with bones, and also fluoridated water. Deficiency of fluoride can lead to tooth decay, but excess can also affect your teeth. Excess fluoride can lead to fluorosis, which causes black and brown stains and cracking and pitting of teeth. So in this illustration, it's showing an instance of too little fluoride and how that can make your teeth more susceptible to cavities. But then too much fluoride can again lead to fluorosis, which includes that sort of brown staining on teeth. And so the last couple trace minerals we're going to get into here, manganese. Manganese is a constituent of some enzymes and activator of others involved in carbohydrate and cholesterol metabolism, bone formation, urea synthesis, and also works to prevent oxidative damage from things like free radicals. The RDA for manganese in men is 2.3 milligrams per day, and in women it's 1.8 milligrams per day. Sources of manganese include whole grains, nuts, legumes, and leafy green vegetables. And the last trace mineral we're going to talk about, molybdenum. Molybdenum is needed to activate enzymes functioning in metabolism of sulfur-containing amino acids and nitrogen-containing compounds in DNA and RNA, the production of uric acid, which is a waste product that's excreted from your body, and also oxidation and detoxification of other compounds. Molybdenum is readily absorbed from foods and regulated by excretion in the urine and bile. The RDA in adults is 45 milligrams per day, so higher than a lot of the other trace minerals that we talked about, though molybdenum isn't something that is often talked about or listed on nutrition facts labels. Sources of molybdenum include milk and milk products, organ meats, breads, cereals, and legumes. In the last couple slides here, we just have table 8.4, which goes through a list of the trace minerals. This is right in your textbook, so I encourage you to take a look at this. Again, it's a pretty, pretty good way of organizing the information that we talked about for trace minerals. So I encourage you to take a look at that, look at comparing each of the trace minerals, the sources of them. You aren't going to be required to memorize any of the recommended intakes, any of those numbers, but they are good to think about, especially if there's a particular mineral that you might be at risk of deficiency for. So that's what I have for today in our discussion of minerals. If you have any questions, I'll see you guys on Thursday. Feel free to ask me then, or shoot me an email if it's, a really, really pressing question. Otherwise, I'll see you then, and I hope you guys have a great week.